Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Wednesday morning, but looks like there's already a bunch of questions, so there probably was enough time for everybody. So let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, PTRJ said, thanks for the VHS videos. They think they've discovered a new hobby. They noticed that my example tapes look immaculate on my captures. What maintenance do I run on my VCR, and did I have to clean up my VHS tapes at all? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I haven't actually done any maintenance. I bought this VCR a couple of years ago, and it was perfect. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And these later model VCRs, especially the JVC ones with S-video output, usually were made and manufactured towards the end of the VHS era. So even though there are many years on them, 20 years or so, it had a lot less usage than a VCR of like the early 90s, where they were running daily, basically, especially people that use it to record their TV shows and all of that stuff. I would assume that the basics would apply. So check the capacitors, but also clean up the different tape heads and everything else, just kind of like cassette tape maintenance, cassette player maintenance. But I haven't dug deep into that yet. And maybe that's something I could cover in the future, but I would want to finish the capture stuff first. So that's probably a 2025 deep dive. And I also bet that there's probably a bunch of people that really get this right and have good videos out there. Whereas much like the start of the retro gaming, when RetroRGB kind of came about, there's a lot of great info about VHS capture scattered across with mostly incorrect info mixed in. I know it sounds so pompous when I say that, but go search for yourself. It's definitely the truth. So I want to focus on that first, but that's an awesome question. And if anybody knows of great videos or resources out there, I would love to link to them. So, post them in the description, and maybe I'll talk about them again next week. And also, if you're on the support services, you could just post links. But if you're on YouTube, you have to post descriptions, not the actual links to anything, or YouTube will just delete them. It won't even show up in my held for review bin. Now, the other part of your question, did I have to clean up my VHS tapes? So I got lucky. I bought a handheld VHS camcorder and a couple of brand new VHS tapes from eBay and Amazon, obviously leftover new old stock. And that could have gone any way. If those tapes were stored in a very high heat, high humidity area, they could have been junk before I even opened them. But they weren't somehow. So I was able to pull off the sealing on them, throw them in the VHS camcorder, and get that. The dog footage, I think, was really the best examples in those. And I mean, I just got lucky. Eurotrip was in decent condition. That was a friend's that just gave me a stack of old VHS tapes that one came from a rental place. So that had a lot of use on it. And it still just looked good enough. Even after the magnetic ruining of it, it still cut the point across exactly as I wanted. So I didn't have to clean up those tapes, and I'm kind of wondering how that would work. So, do I need to do that? Is that something that I should run the tapes through a cleaner? The only thing that I know for sure is doing it improperly will absolutely hurt your player and tapes. So it's, for me personally, it's one of those things that if it didn't have any issues, it's probably better for me to just leave well enough alone. However, with vinyl, you absolutely need to clean, especially old ones, but even brand new. I put them through my cleaner, the project, I don't know how you say it, and friends of mine even use ultrasonic cleaners as well, and even record presses to make sure that there isn't any wobble on them. And that's even with brand new stuff. And that way you could keep your needle clean and make sure that all of your equipment stays in good shape. So I imagine with magnetic tape media, it's something like that. I just haven't gone down that road yet. So really sorry for for basically a giant fail of an answer to your questions. My answer to you is, I don't know for sure, but I'll find out eventually. So sorry about that. But yeah, I did make a couple of mistakes with the direct 480i capture in that video, but the point stands home. If you want the easy solution of hitting play on your VCR, hitting record on your PC recorder, and using the Tink to go direct to whatever resolution you want, it's still better than any solution on Amazon and most other solutions out there. Direct 480i and Doomsday will get you better quality, but at the cost of a lot more time. So it's just really up to you. For me personally, there was a lot of old home videos that I had that were like, I think I've said this before, but it was before the era where people really had a camera on them at all times. So I remember my dad getting on one of the rides at Disney with us. I think it was It's a Small World ride or something. I don't know. This was 30 years ago, and he recorded the whole ride, as if somebody's going to sit there and watch all 15 minutes of it. And maybe that's a thing. Maybe somebody would like to go back and do that. But for the most part, people want snippets. So for me, I'm going back and re-recording all of the stuff that's really special to me and my family using the best possible methods. And if I ever needed to rescan something, I would most likely just use the tank, go straight to 4K. And no, it's not as good quality, but it's still great. And it's probably better than most transfer services do as well. So I'm gonna do a little bit of research on that. I might send some tapes out to a couple of transfer services just to see the quality that they give. I don't want to turn this VHS series into a hit piece. What if all the services I send them to do a terrible job? I don't know. Any thoughts on that? If you've sat through my 5 minutes of rambling on this, maybe you could chime in. But PTRJ, thank you for the kind words. Sorry this was useless, but I'm definitely going to look into this for you. Next up, also on Floatplane, Amen said they're currently arranging a retro game meetup called Pixel Party in the Faroe Islands. That sounds amazing. I would love to go visit. They'll have a dozen console setups from different generations for the guests to play. Can I recommend some games that would work well in a convention format so lots of people can try the consoles and get a feeling for each? The lineup of consoles is NES, SNES, N64, GameCube, Wii, Switch, Xbox, Master System, Mega Drive, PS1, PS2, PS3, and maybe Commodore 128. The event will be on July 23rd, so they could maybe find the games online in time if they don't have them already. This is the first event of its kind here, and hopefully it will gather together the few of us nerds and maybe become the gateway drug for others. Love it. Maybe this will become a recurring event where others can have their own stuff with them, but this first one is just to see if there's interest or not. So I do have an opinion on this, but it's just an opinion. And it would be cool if anybody else would chime in for whatever you think in this scenario. But my opinion is games that are 2-player, that are quick to get into, are the ones that are going to be the biggest hit, because there are some games like, playing GoldenEye and stuff like that. That would be awesome. And you probably should have that. But to really sit and enjoy a session, you need some time. Whereas if people want to experience all of them, like having Contra is definitely great because people would want that, but don't put the Konami code in because you don't want people sitting down for a half hour at a time. But Super Dodgeball, Double Dribble for NES, any game where people could just sit down, immediately start playing, and are able to have their experience in 5 minutes-ish and move on, I think would be the best. So Mario Kart, any fighting game that you feel comfortable. If it's little kids, you might not want Mortal Kombat, or, maybe you would. I don't know. I was like 10 when that game came out, and you don't see me going around ripping people's hearts out with my bare hands. I totally got that was cartoon violence. So it's up to you. Everybody has a different opinion on that. But yeah, that for me is the vibe that I would have, is 2-player games that people could experience with each other, that are fairly quick. And of course, people are going to want to play Mario and Tetris and a lot of the 1-player games as well. But I would just have those available, a couple carts or discs for each console, and just kind of have it so people could really just experience what those were like. And of course, if possible, CRTs. That's such a huge difference. And whenever I go and see conventions and all of these consoles are plugged into an LCD panel's composite video input, I cringe, because nothing about that. Like an emulator on your phone might actually be a better looking, less laggy, more accurate experience than that. So if I do realize it's hard to get CRTs, but like Retro World bends over backwards to get all of the proper CRTs for each console generation, and it just looks great. It's exactly what you would expect. So yeah, that's basically it. But that's awesome. Definitely take pictures and let me know. I'd love to see what that turned out like. But it sounds like a lot of fun. All right, real quick, not a question, but I stepped out of the shower, ran outside to grab something, and walked through a spider's web. And I don't know how I didn't see it, but if any of you are watching this on video and you see me scratching like a crackhead, it's because the spider web wrapped all around me and I still feel it pulling on me. And I'm just expecting halfway through this video a spider to crawl up over my shoulder and wave at you all. So no, there is still no spider problem here. That was gone after the first summer. The few spiders we have are not a problem at all. But that was just one of those moments where it's like, the only thing worse than getting out of the shower and immediately walking through spider webs is getting out of the shower and then immediately having to poop. Now, moving over to Patreon, first up, John Valise said they want to make an actual cart of Infidelity's SNES port of The Legend of Zelda. Do I happen to know what's the best PCB to go with for tackling such a project? So, I have no clue, but Fenris Wolf Retro made one and it came out great. But I think there's a lot of very important stipulations. Like they used fast ROM to make sure that the ROM chips were fast enough to help reduce slowdown. And I think there were other things involved that really made this a very unique thing and a lot harder to just flash on a cartridge than your average, like, hey, I want to build a one-off repro of a game or something like that. Also, it's impossible to get the MSU1 audio soundtracks, which, while I really like those, I also just love the original soundtrack. So that certainly wasn't a big deal for me when I got the one from Fenris. But I think there's a lot more involved in this than your average repro. So maybe reach out to Fenris and see if they would be able to share. And if not, then maybe, reach out to Infidelity and kind of see who else has been doing stuff like this. But I'm pretty sure it's harder than just taking an SNES game and swapping the ROMs out, or buying buying a repro everything and adding your own chips to it. I think there's more to it than that, and I don't think it's something that could be easily reproducible. So yeah, sorry, kind of useless to you on this one. Next up, T. Ryan Arnold wants to know the best way to scale and present retro game footage in high definition. And I actually have a bunch of videos on this, an entire section of the website, and I will leave a link to the page that's most relevant to what you're talking about now. However, since you asked the question, I could tailor it a little bit more towards your exact needs. You mentioned having a RetroTink 2X Pro. So the decision that you're going to need to make is how big of a file are you able to work with, and does that even matter? So, for example, if you could capture in a lossless codec like Lagarith, I really like that one. For this scenario, I really like that one. If you could capture in that, it's going to be a much bigger file than a heavily compressed version, but still not too big because it's only 720 by 480 compared to 1080p or whatever else. And if you're going to just delete it when you're done, it doesn't really matter at all. Or if you have a big hard drive, and you're going to keep these anyway to use for future videos and whatever else that you're going to do, that's probably the best way to do it, because applying compression at the end is always better than at the beginning. And that doesn't matter if you're talking about video games, VHS, whatever. Just with video game content, it's going to be a lot more noticeable than just standard video content. So working with the equipment that you have, I personally would take that 2X Pro and I would use Virtual Dub to record lossless to Lagarith at the exact resolution, 720 by 480, which means it's going to be a little stretched probably, but that's totally fine. Then you just follow the guide that I have to also use Virtual Dub to then scale it and crop it any way that you would like. And that includes scaling it and smushing it back to the proper aspect ratio, because that's a massive pet peeve of mine. I totally get if you don't have the equipment and the time to do pixel perfect, complete lossless captures, but people who just like stretch their stuff to 16 by 9 or have the square pixel look that are trying to present archival footage showing you what these games were like, it kind of drives me nuts, because it's not hard at all to fix it, which the page shows. And that's basically it. You just use sharp scaling and Virtual Dub. You could cut it any way you'd like, and then afterwards, if you want, you could then edit that in anything else that you have. So if you're going to edit it in Premiere, let's say, I would try to export that in another lossless codec, like any of the QuickTime ProRes ones or UT Video or whatever else that's compatible with Premiere these days. Because I don't know if you realize, but Premiere is dropped support for lots of codecs over the years, including Lagarith, which drives me insane. I pay for that software. It would be nice if they didn't take features away, but rant aside, if you're going to be re-editing it, then keep it in lossless. It's going to be a giant file. Just delete them all when you're done. And if you don't need to, if you really just want to edit it and put up clips, then just do it all in Virtual Dub, and that's it. Just, export it to H.264, 265, upload that to YouTube or wherever else, and you're good to go. But I think as long as you have the least compressed original file, then you're fine. If you have to use your capture card software to do it, it's not going to ruin it, but it's definitely going to be a noticeable difference. And if this is something that becomes very important to you, you're going to have to upgrade your scaler at some point. Tink 5X, OSSC Pro, any of those would be able to present to you 1080p lossless output for you to then do whatever you wanted with. And same thing applies. If you're going directly to YouTube from 1080p, you would want to just record in H.264 or 5. But if you're then going into Premiere to edit your videos to then go to YouTube, I would also use lossless for 1080p, which is some massive files. But once again, just delete them when you're done and you should be okay. But there are so many advantages to recording lossless and lower resolutions for video games, because if you're scaling them anyway, it's going to look the same. So hopefully I'll be able to point you in the right direction, but I would give this a try. Check out the page that I'll link to and let me know if you have any questions, and we could continue the conversation to try to walk you through it. Tony Escobar wanted to follow up on the issues they were having with their mode, where some games would either load incredibly slow or just crash altogether, and they determined it was the M2 hard drive in their setup. Once they swapped that out for an SSD, all of the problems went away. So while it's solved, they do want to use their current mount that it's built around smaller stuff. So do I have any suggestions for M2 drives? And unfortunately, I don't. I don't think I've really used very many of those. I went basically from SSD to NVMe and kind of skipped a lot of the M2 stuff. However, the only thing I can suggest is whatever drive you need, get much bigger, because that was the problem that I discussed that Epos Fox had talked with me about, where if you need to have 500 gigabytes worth of data, don't get a 500 gigabyte SSD, get much bigger, 750, a terabyte, whatever else, because a lot of the lower end SSDs of any kind will slow down dramatically as you start to fill them up, which is kind of ridiculous and, feels a little bit like a sham, but the prices on these drives have also plummeted over the years. So it is what it is, I guess. But if anybody else has any suggestions, if they're using an M2 drive with a mode with a laser bear adapter, please post what you're using. And once again, I don't delete links. It is all YouTube that does it. So please just spell out, I use a Western Digital model 12345 at this, whatever. So yeah, if anybody else has the ability or is running that and doesn't have any problems, please let us know. But at the very least, Tony's back up and running. So that's cool. And as always, thanks for the kind words, Tony. One more from Tony. They wanted to know how I thought that HDMI Famicom compared to other solutions like the Tiny NES, as well as FPGA alternatives such as the AVS. They got a sense that there are a lot of things still missing from the HDMI Famicom, but they could be wrong. So I don't think there's a lot missing. I think that bodge fix for the zapper is missing, but that should be fixed for anyone that you buy from now on. I think they're just going to hand solder it and then change the motherboard. And that's one of those things that's such an easy thing. I would not worry about that being done post-production. That's two very basic wires that even if you've ordered yours before the fix, anybody with a soldering iron and a tiny bit of patience could do this, even as a first beginner project. It's that easy. So not a big deal there. And there were a bunch of firmware updates that I thought would be nice, but nothing that I thought would be a deal breaker. However, the difference between the other two, I don't think the Tiny NES has any HDMI output. That one's just composite video output, right? So you don't have that integrated RGB, S-video, and HDMI signal as well. You only get composite. I could be thinking about another one, and my apologies if I got that one wrong. And the AVS also outputs 720p HDMI, but doesn't output any analog signal at all, not even like a direct 240p over HDMI to use a converter with. So that's a pretty big deal. However, the AVS does accept NES and Famicom cartridges, but it's FPGA based. And while it's very good, it's not as accurate as using original CPU and PPU like this one does. And of course, price is a big factor, because you could just pick up a Mister and get all of this and a lot more for about the same price without original cartridges, or you can get an original Famicom and you could install a mod to it. So it really just comes down to what you want. And so many people in the comments didn't understand that at all. I got so many trolly comments like, this is a ripoff, this is dumb, why wouldn't you? I mean, it was almost as stupid as, this is stupid, just emulate. Like, that's not what people wanted. So people like you, Tony, who have different types of setups and know what you want, would have to apply all of that to whether you think this is going to be a good fit. I know you got a bunch of original consoles and Misters. So what's your take on this then? For me personally, my favorite consoles are SNES and Genesis, and I really love Master System and NES, and I want those originals for the rest of my life. I don't care if they end up being things that just sit on a shelf somewhere and I just see them and it makes me happy. I always want those originals. I always want the ability to play original cartridges. However, when quality is a factor, when I'm streaming or if I just want to sink into like a brand new MSU1 mod on an RGB monitor, I'll always go with the Mister and play the ROMs. So if I didn't have a working NES, I might actually pick up this HDMI console so I could use my original cartridges. I would need the NES adapter, of course, and be able to stream and play at a CRT at the same time. But that's not for everybody. So I would kind of just take every one of these things into consideration and see. And if you're just playing on via composite video on a CRT, the Tiny NES might be a better choice. I think it's cheaper too. So I don't know. That's a great question, but I think my short answer is that comes down to your needs and whatever you feel like it would, or however you feel like any of these products would fit into your setup. So great question, but this is one where everybody's going to have to make their own decision, and I'm just here to lag test and provide the facts for you to sift through them. Next up, Samson Wick wants to know if I could recommend a good composite and audio splitter that won't degrade the signal at all. And what I would suggest is looking on eBay or maybe even Amazon for video distribution amps and look for ones with composite or possibly S-video as well. And they're all going to be powered, but that's definitely the type of thing I would look for. And you could find equipment that was a lot of money in the early 2000s for basically nothing these days. And that should be able to provide exactly what you would need. It would have 1 or 2 inputs and 2 or 4 or more outputs, and that should handle absolutely everything, completely safe to use with your consoles. And you should definitely check to see if it degrades the signal. If it does, check your cables. And if your cables are still fine, then maybe there's something wrong with the box. So this is one of those things that I would test immediately upon buying, because you never know. If you're buying 20-year-old equipment, the capacitors could be all dead. It could be left in a bad environment and the whole board could be flaky or something like that. But this is one of those scenarios where you shouldn't have to worry with composite video. You should just be able to plug everything in, send it to your displays, and if it seems fine, then it should just be fine. So I'll see if I could find anything on eBay that I could recommend, but it might be better to just kind of search for something and see what you get. Or if you could find something on Amazon, I don't really know, but I'll try to do a very quick search and see. But anything cheap should be a good start for you. Next, a couple of questions from Hiffy Hippo. First, they need some component video cables, and they already have the HD RetroVision ones, but they're too long for this particular use case. So can I recommend any brands? Unfortunately not, because all of the brands that I've seen are either very, very expensive, like custom-made cables, or they're not consistent. I've had some brands that have the death grip that yanked out an RCA port from one of the devices I have. I have stuff that the grip is fine, but the cables are so thick that they don't bend right, so you can't wrap them in a tight space the way that you would want to for a shorter cable. So I suggest just buying any cable that's listed as shielded and test for yourself. And the easiest way to do it is start with the HD RetroVisions and swap it out. So let's just say you have an SNES with HD RetroVision component cables going into a G-Comp switch with the basic RCA to RCA HD RetroVisions going out into a capture card. Go load up Super Mario World, go to that first level and just hit pause when it boots and take a screenshot. Then swap out the output HD RetroVision cables with whatever these short ones are and take the same screenshot. And if you're paused, you can just leave it right as is. And if you see like diagonal interference in the blue background, or if you see weird wavy lines, then they're not properly shielded and you should return them. Or then maybe also do a quick audio recording, or just record video, even compressed with your capture card, and just listen to a couple seconds of the audio, 10 seconds, and then listen to it again on the other cables. And this is actually best for something like any Konami game that has an all-white screen, because the all-white screen bumps up the voltage of the video, which creates interference on the audio. You're always going to hear a buzz with that with analog cables, but if the buzz is significantly louder with the other cables, then they're not properly shielded. But if the buzz is about the same, you're good to go. Now, these are very rudimentary tests. I wouldn't use those as like the end-all be-all. It passed those tests, so the cables are perfect, but that should be more than enough for your needs to make sure that you're not accidentally introducing a noisy set of cables into your setup. So hopefully that made sense. Next, RetroRGB has potentially out-of-date information for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. I forgot we had a page for the Neo Geo Pocket Color until I read your question. Yeah, definitely is. Do I have any thoughts on the Q5 IPS screen? So if Tito did a video on it, that's what I would recommend. I'll search after this. If there is, I'll drop a link for you. But I'm not really a handheld gamer. And while I wanted the information on the website, I do need to go back and update every one of those pages. And almost everyone's basically going to conclude, check out the Macho Nacho Productions channel and see what they suggest as the latest one, because Tito's really been on top of all of this stuff. So I would search for that first and see, but there should be some more cool things coming out for the Neo Geo Pocket Color soon. So hopefully we'll be able to check that out. Next up, Jason Guffey has a friend with one of those Philips Hue HDMI LED lighting kits. Basically, you plug your devices into this box, you plug your box into the TV, and then you put an LED lighting strip behind the TV, so it lights your wall behind the TV to sort of match what's on screen. And I've actually never used those. The only ones I've ever really seen, I've never seen them in person, and the only in-depth video I've ever seen was one from Chris Majestic, where I believe he made his own. I'll leave a link to the video that I think I watched. If not, I like that channel anyway. So, but the problem is that it's not really working with the PS5. And they think everything's all rated correctly, but they're not sure. So what I would say is just double check everything in all of the settings. So it looks like the Philips Hue box can accept 4K 60 with Dolby Vision HDR, but it definitely can't accept 4K 120. So just double check that all of those settings match up, and then maybe drop the HDR, drop the Dolby Vision, use a different console and run 1080p, and try to troubleshoot and see if you could find the issue itself. Jason tried swapping out cables, which is never a bad thing to do, so good call there. But I have no experience with this, so it could just simply be that the PS5 is newer than those boxes, so the protocols don't 100% sync up. But I would, I'm going to be totally useless to you with this one because I've just never even really seen them in person. It is something that after watching Chris's video, I was definitely interested in, because one of the things I was curious about is if you could use those to simulate projector flicker. So if you're watching an old movie, you could possibly strobe the LEDs a little bit differently, or maybe to match exactly on screen. And I don't think the Philips one could do that, because you would need to have it running at 96 hertz to match a 35 millimeter BFI flicker or something like that. So I think I'm overcomplicating it by even thinking of it that way, but I would love to see something like that, because projectors are really great for old content and sometimes for newer, but they're a pain. It requires a dark room. All those reviewers that say you could replace your flat panel with a projector are just lying to you, or they've never tried it in a dimly lit room even. So projectors aren't for everybody. So I would love to see if I could make flat panels switch into a mode that's more projector-like. And I think you might be able to use stuff like the Philips Hue to do just that, but all guessing. So if you get this thing working and it looks good, throw on an old movie and see if that's how you feel about this, or if it's just not even a feature that it has. But let me know what you think, Jason. I know you like to tinker just as much as I do, so if you ever get around to that, let me know. But sorry, other than pointing you to a video that doesn't talk about the Philips Hue, I'm just completely useless to you on this one. Next up, Tomas has a Dreamcast that they connect to two different displays. They first connect it to a consumer-grade Trinitron with component video inputs via a retro access RGB SCART cable into an RGB to comp, and they also connect it to a PC VGA CRT monitor with a standard Dreamcast VGA cable. And they like the look of the Dreamcast on both displays, but they would love a way to easily switch signals to either display via a switch, but they're not sure what other cables or adapters they would need to accomplish this. So I'll skip to the end and say what you're doing is great, and it is probably the easiest solution overall, and certainly the most cost effective because you also already own all that stuff. But if you wanted some alternatives, I'll throw out a suggestion or two and let me know if any of this fits your setup or if there's anything else that comes into play. If you wanted to, you could integrate a switch into all of this. Something like an Extron Crosspoint Matrix switch. You can get a G-Comp or a GamesCare switch. And you can switch around your cables as well. So if Retro Gaming Cables ever restocks their Dreamcast cable, component video cable, or if the HD Retrovision ones magically appear, you could get a set of those, run it through a component video switch, have one output going directly to the Trinitron and another output going into a component video to VGA converter. So the only thing that you would have to do is you'd have to flip the switch on the cable itself. So 15 kilohertz for the Trinitron, 31 for the other monitor, and then switch the inputs. Or if it's a dual output switch, then you got nothing to worry about. So you would have to buy all new stuff. You could sell off what you have, and you'd also have to wait for Retro Gaming Cables to come back in stock with that one. But that would be an easy way to do it just by pushing some buttons. Now, I would not suggest doing all of that if this is your only use case setup. So let's just say you're a gamer that mostly uses modern, but you love the Dreamcast and you have this setup. What you're doing is fine. But if you have other stuff that you want to multiple monitors, an Extron Crosspoint is a matrix switch. That would be awesome. And it's great for composite. It's really easy for composite and component video. It gets a bit more complicated if you want to do things like use that RGB to comp to route the signals in and out and do kind of loop back stuff. But you could do that with existing equipment. You could, but that would cost a lot in custom cables that you would have to either buy or make. And if you just wanted stuff with a bunch of component inputs and 2 outputs, that might work as well. So kind of think about your total setup and see, is there other equipment that you could integrate in that makes other parts of your setup simplified, not just this? And if so, let me know if you want any more suggestions for that. But if not, you're probably going to want to just leave well enough alone and not have to spend any more money. But let me know what you think. Next up, a couple questions from Kirk. First, they have a 10-in 3-out SCART switch from AliExpress that works great except with the Mister. If they go from their Mister SCART cable direct to their CRT, it works fine, but the switch isn't detecting it. So my guess then is there's no voltage going down that cable. So you could either pick up a cable designed specifically for the Mister that also plugs into the USB ports and provides power, or you could probably just make your own if you're comfortable doing that. You would just need to get a USB pigtail and then just solder power and ground to the corresponding pins inside the SCART head. And that way, when the Mister is off, everything's off. And when you power on the Mister, the voltage comes down the USB line and tells the switch, hey, I'm on, and that's it. Now, I am guessing, but it's a little more than a guess. That's from a guess coming from a lot of experience in this. It could be a bunch of other things, but I would just make sure that the cable is properly built and has the ability for power. And there's got to be people making those if you're not comfortable modding it yourself. This is not an uncommon problem. So that should be something that you should be able to figure out. I don't think there's a setting that you could switch on your Mister for this, though. I think it's really going to be contained in the cable. But if anybody has any other thoughts, please chime in. Also, they purchased a VGA to composite S-Video adapter for Retro Castle, but they can't seem to find instructions on how to use it. So if you mean the one designed specifically for Mister based on the Mic S circuit, then that you could just go ahead and try it and you're not going to harm anything. If you're talking about the standalone box that Ivory sells, I don't think he has one with a D-sub input. I think that's only SCART. And that is just a plug and play device, but those really are designed for S-Video and composite doesn't work perfect. Yet, Ivory's still trying to get that one that does good composite finished up. There was a problem with the manufacturer. There's a whole bunch of issues the past couple months with manufacturing. So not just related to Retro Castle. I had a bunch of friends have issues with certain shops. So if that's what you're talking about, it's just plug and play. If you're talking about the one based on the Mic S adapter, you might want to double check the Retro Castle website to see if they have any instructions, but I'm pretty sure that you would just connect that adapter and then set your Mister INI file to S-Video, even if you're using composite video. The composite video setting is totally different. It's a bit confusing, I know, but that circuit is what has what you need to have proper composite video output. And I think you could just flip a dip switch on the side. If there's no instructions, though, feel free to give it a try, because you're not going to send over voltage. You're not going to harm anything. The worst thing that could happen is it comes out black and white, or you don't get anything at all. Just remember where your dip switches are to start, because you're going to want to put those back for standard RGBS. But this is one of those rare scenarios where flip away, you don't really have anything to worry about, and you should be able to just figure it out. Just make sure to change the Mr. INI file, or add a second. You could add multiple files now, and that might be easiest, because then you could just change on boot or something like that and kind of see where that goes. Next up, Skajab was hoping that somebody would create a Bluetooth 3D glasses adapter for the Sega Master System. And I have been begging people to make this for a very, very long time. Essentially, you could take those modern active shutter glasses that you would use on 3D TVs from, I guess, 10 years ago now, and you could have an adapter, any basic Bluetooth adapter, that should be able to sync those to either a Sega Master System or even the Mister. That should be completely possible as well. But I don't know if anybody's actually done it. I have a Mr. 3D glasses adapter that uses the standard active shutter ones from back in the day, like the Master System or a Nintendo one that has the phone jack style plug. I have one of those, and that would need to be updated per core, but that would work. It was just a prototype, and the prototype core that was sent with it doesn't work anymore for whatever reason. But the Bluetooth one would be better because there's no wires. The glasses are physically bigger and better made than ones from 30 years ago. So I would love to see that. And I do completely realize that, this is a real niche thing that you have to have a CRT for. You can't even use it on a 3D TV. You might be able to if somebody tweaked some cores, but that's a lot of work for a handful of games that are actually worth playing. And there are absolutely a bunch of 3D games worth playing, but not a ton. But where I think this would really make the biggest difference is stuff like Space Harrier 3D for the X68K. I think that's a pretty neat thing that basically nobody has experienced. That would be really awesome for people with the Mister to have. So maybe it could be done with the original Master System. Maybe it'd be done on a Mister. I think Mister would probably be better, worth people's time, because you could then play every active shutter 3D game through it, just via CRT, of course. I just don't know if it would be possible or how easy. So I agree. I would love to see that, but I just don't know anybody that would have both the knowledge and the equipment to test all of that stuff. Next up, Danny Funker is getting into digitizing older media with the RetroTink 4K, and they picked up the same VCR that I was using, the S-Video Outputting JVC, which I really love that one, so good choice. I'm sure there's better ones out there, but as you saw in the video, the quality was pretty darn good. But they're also looking into digitizing other kinds of home video. They have a number of Hi8 Video 8 tapes, and they're looking to use that via the Tink. And funny enough, my home videos from my childhood are all Super 8. So one of the videos that I'm working on, I think this VHS thing is going to become a series of videos because there's just so much to it. But I'm also simultaneously working on how to use everything that I've learned in this to apply it to other formats. So through the help of a couple of friends, shout out to Fudo, who's always really helpful with this stuff, I didn't know that Hi8 is backward compatible with Video 8. So you could take a Video 8 tape like the ones from the 80s and 90s in my childhood and put it in a Hi8 player. So I was able to get a player that has S-Video output, and I was running some tests, and there is a noticeable difference over composite video, more so than the VHS format. So I think that you should be able to use the exact same VHS profile. And I would suggest, if you already have a device coming, totally cool. If you're really looking for, squeezing every ounce of perfection out of this thing, you could try to get a different player. They're expensive, so the player that you got might just be a better choice. But it should all work the same. It should all be the same as VHS. And in fact, one of the things I noticed is that my Video 8 player was more susceptible to time-based correction, and not just the AV sync, the wobble that you get in the video. I got all of this recorded, so I'll show this in upcoming videos, hopefully by the end of the year. And the Tink 4K has a time-based corrector that fixes that stuff. So that's definitely something, as I've said a gazillion times, the Tink 5X and 4K are not the world's most perfect digitization boxes. But if you compare them to the alternatives and you take the whole picture into account, they're freaking awesome. So the Tink 4K didn't, for whatever reason, didn't do as good of a job deinterlacing Super 8 as it did VHS. Maybe there's just some tweaks I could make to help that. But the built-in time-based correction and comb filter, especially if your player only has composite video output, is still going to put it far ahead of most other solutions. And once again, you're just spitting out whatever file that you're looking to go to. So, using one of those Osprey cards or Doomsday, which I'm pretty sure you could probably have a custom Doomsday thing made up for Video 8 and High 8, but that's a lot of time. That's a lot of post-processing. That's a lot more effort. And you will notice a difference, but it's the difference going from almost all other solutions to the Tink 4K is far better or far bigger of a difference than the Tink 4K to Direct 480i and post-processing. It's a difference, but what you've gotten is already taking you so much farther than basically anything you could buy off of Amazon. So yeah, hopefully I'd be able to point you in the right direction. I'll leave a link to the exact player I bought just in case you're interested in this stuff. It's expensive, but it was pretty cool. And it's nice having a Video 8 player because they're not backward compatible with VHS. So now if I ever just want to watch my old tapes on a nice CRT that we couldn't have afforded back in the 90s, I could do so. I don't see that happening a lot, but I bet you when my brother comes to visit, we'll do that at least once before we die. So I'll leave a link to the one that I got that I've had good luck with so far, but your camcorder that you got should be totally fine as well. Quantum Guitar wanted to follow up on the 1080i conversation from the other week and found some info like the original Blu-ray spec doesn't include 1080p 30 or 1080p 25. So if people wanted to have a workaround for that frame rate, you could encode it as 1080i 60 or 50 and then hopefully have your player or TV do some kind of conversion for that. I believe if you wanted to do it that way, that would actually make the output resolution 540p 60 or 50 then, for the same reasons that like Dan and I talked about in the recent podcast. I'll hopefully have a video showing this soon where I could kind of dig into all of this. But it seems like because of this, you're going to have to rely on your player or TV to do some kind of conversion for that content. And that's something that I want to do some more research on because I would love to do a video with visual examples of how interlaced video works. And while I think I got 480i down pretty solid, the 1080i stuff in the context that you're talking about, I'm not really sure I have a firm grasp on it. And I don't know if things have changed over the years because when the Blu-ray spec first came out, there were a few things that happened since then that were definitely different. Like 3D Blu-ray wasn't invented when the original Blu-ray spec came out. So the stuff that you're talking about would be how content was handled in that era that was then converted to 1080i. And that's a really great, those are great questions. And that's something interesting and a rabbit hole I'm going to have to go down at some point. But I really just don't know how any of that would apply to which content. And if then there were possibly re-releases that had it output in different formats, or if there were alternatives or yada, yada, yada. So I don't really want to speak to any of that because I would mostly be guessing. And while I would probably guess from a lot of the 480i stuff too, I have a way more solid grasp of that. What I would say is some of your questions are about how does the IVTC, the inverse telecine stuff, compare to via TVs and Blu-ray players to the Tink? And those are all great questions that I'm going to have to figure out as I go down that road and kind of figure out how to deal with all of that. If you have an idea of some 1080i sources, I don't really have a lot of ability to play PAL stuff, but if you have any 1080i NTSC stuff, that's not sports. Sports is obviously going to be 60 fields per second, just in a higher resolution so that you can get a smoother frame rate, just like with 480i. I get that, but so anything that's not just 60 fields per second, anything that has this weird conversion done to it. If you could suggest some content, I could use that for testing, and then I would be much more suited to answer any of these questions. But for now, all I could say is I'm on it, and it's something that is increasingly becoming more important as people really need to figure out how to convert any of these weird older interlaced formats to whatever TVs that you're using today. So yeah, thanks, Max. And let me know if you have any content suggestions. Well, that's it for this time. As always, if you have any questions at all, please just ask them wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. The way these services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. And also, as you saw here today, regardless of what service you support on, I like just scrolling through and having a conversation in real time as if we were hanging out somewhere together. I often don't have the answer, but hopefully I can at least point people in the right direction. So any question at all, fire away. And as always, thank you so much to anybody who supports in absolutely any way, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff alive. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.